Hello to the good people and to the bad. Bad people need love too.
When it comes to positivity, we all need it.
Great about people whose names are familiar to us now, like Isaiah Thomas.
Those things always work when it comes to putting out your best self.
God has blessed you with a beautiful voice, Chris. Thank you very much for doing this.
Hello to the good people and to the bad people, friends and enemies. And a hearty boom shakalaka to all of you out there. I am Chris Bass, and this is CBI-Chris Bass Interviews. And we do this every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, and 2 p.m. Pacific time, always wanting you to be well where you are. I like what I do. In fact, I love what I do. I get a chance to meet great people, especially people I've admired over time, like this guest coming up now. A Renaissance YouTuber who's into cooking, crafts, woodworking, dining, travel, and learning new things. Also, best known as well for his time at NBC5 Chicago in the lifestyle contributor section for his Wayne's Weekend segment. And he is true Renaissance man. I can't even go across the street, let alone what he does. So that's why I admire this man so much. Please welcome to CBI Chris Bass Interviews, Wayne Johnson. How you doing, Wayne?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you?
Man, I'm telling you, you are the true Renaissance person. Now, before we go any further, I have to address the haberdashery that you have on your social media page on Facebook. The hat.
The hat?
The hat, dude, is tight. Had the black hat. I'm telling you, I was jealous off the bat. First of all, great hat. And where did you get that hat? Where haberdashery did you get your hat from, sir?
I actually bought that at the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas. I was out there about 6-7 months ago. And the funny thing is one of my friends who actually is hair challenged on the top used to wear baseball caps all the time. And I finally convinced him that baseball caps weren't appropriate in a nice restaurant. And so we were walking by a hat store in Palm Springs, as a matter of fact, about a year before that. And I convinced him to buy a few hats. And he bought himself a fedora, which I thought was great. And then a group of us were in Las Vegas 6 months ago. And there was a great hat store right by the little canal that's downstairs in the Venetian. Mm-hmm. And so I've always wanted a hat like that. So I tried on a number of ones, but that ended up being, I just love the look of it. So yeah, I bought that. I'm also from Texas. I've got a great cowboy hat as well that I'll occasionally wear in Chicago, but you get odd looks when you're in Chicago wearing a cowboy hat. So I don't.
Oh man, later for them, man. you're doing your best life, as they say. So you mentioned about growing up in Texas. What part of Texas did you grow up in?
Well, the full fact is I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, but my father was in the military and we traveled quite a bit growing up. Before I reached the 9th grade, we lived in Alabama, Georgia, Washington State, Okinawa, Massachusetts, and then 2 cities in Texas. I lived in Houston as a kid. I lived in San Antonio before I reached the 9th grade. And then I also lived in Austin and went to college for 4 years at the University of Texas at Austin. So Texas has always been home. It's always been home base. Even though we traveled a lot, we always had the same house in Houston during all those times. At times, my grandmother stayed there when we were out of town. But so Texas is technically in my mind, my home and my origin.
Only child, siblings?
I have 4 brothers, or I had 4 brothers. Sadly, I've lost 2 of my brothers, but there are 5.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I might appreciate that. My poor mom had to deal with 5 boys growing up. And there were a couple of times when my dad in his military career was gone. He was in Vietnam twice for a year each time. So my poor mom had to deal with 5 rambunctious kids. And all 5 of us were completely different personalities and completely different attitudes. So it was quite the challenge for my little 5-foot-tall mom. But she somehow managed to keep us in line. Belts were around in those days, and we got whipped when I was a kid. And I still think that's probably a good idea for some kids that just don't quite get it.
No, you're right about that. Someone once told me, because I have 2 daughters, you're not only raising children, you're raising personalities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do. What I've learned is because my brothers and I are so completely different, the parent's job can only go so far. I mean, your environment, your other friends, your peer groups, all those things will affect you. But I think at home, if you create this solid environment and a consistent environment, one of the issues that was challenging, I think, for my parents is that there's a 14-year age spread from the youngest to the oldest. And I think
Mhm.
as they matured and grew and learned a little bit about us as children, their way of sort of treating us changed a little bit over time. And I think sometimes that's a good thing because you learn to be a better parent, a stronger parent. And other times I think it can be challenging because the older kid looks back and goes, well, wait a minute, that wasn't quite how we got things done. But at the same time, I think if you're a strong parent, a good parent, that foundation is the best you can give a kid. You can't control everything, and you got to just make sure you're doing good by yourself, and otherwise, everything has to happen the way it happens.
5 boys, 5 brothers. Where was your number at?
I was the odd middle child, the kid with all the problems.
No, not the odd middle child, not like the Brady Bunch and
Oh yeah,
Bobby and not
yeah,
Peter
yeah,
and Jan type of thing
right.
going.
No, actually, I was the middle child. My 2 older brothers were really tight, and my 2 younger brothers were really tight. I was kind of the odd kid in the middle, but it sort of gave me my independence too. One of the things about traveling in the military is you don't have the same peer group of friends. Obviously, you've got to go to a new military base and create a new set of friends and friendships, and that was easier for my older brothers and my younger brothers. For me, I ended up being a pretty popular kid in school on the one hand, but I was pretty much independent as well. I got into a lot of things like crafts and that sort of thing on my own because it was my way of sort of doing my own thing without having to go out and try to create new friendships when sometimes we'd live on a military base for only a year or two and then be gone again. But there were military bases are great because they had hobby shops, wood shops, and all those various places where you can go and learn things and do things. And once again, all these little things I did over the years sort of came together and I added upon them each time I learned a new experience. And that's kind of how I do what I do now because of all those experiences I went through in the past.
Well, you're right, because I think what happens is that when you talk about being an odd person, you could work that to your advantage because it just sucks to be around people who are the same people. I mean, that just gets tired very, very quickly. I've always gravitated towards people who were different
Right.
because to me they're most fascinating. And I've been told myself that I was an oddball, so I took it in stride.
Yeah.
And
I don't think being is bad. It's not a bad thing. Not at all.
no, it's not. And that's the thing. It's not a stigma. I think certain people, especially when going through adolescence, you try to find your place in life and where do you belong at. If you embrace it, it's okay. It's all right
Right.
to be different.
It's exactly right. I agree. 100%.
So you went to college. What did you major in when you was in college?
Well, I started off as an architecture major at the University of Texas in Austin, and I enjoyed that for the first 2 years. But also there were some challenges like physics, which I didn't love at all. So one of my professors said, "You know what? Your creativity is there, your imagination's there. Have you thought about the advertising program over in the art department or in the communications department?" So my junior and senior year, I switched my major over to advertising and marketing. So my degree was in advertising, both the business side and the creative side. And Leo Burnett Company here in Chicago initially hired me when I was just right out of college, and they started me off in their client service program, their the business side of the business rather than the creative side. And I did
Mhm.
that for 2.5 years, I believe 3 years. I did it for 3 years, and then I was able to switch from the client side to the creative side, and then I was in the creative department for about 7 years. One of my best and most successful commercials was the very first McDonald's Monopoly promotion. I did that entire campaign, my writer partner and I, which was a lot of fun. And then
Oh, really?
after about 7 or 8 years of that, I became a recruiter for the creative department, and my job was to go out and find young creative talent. So I traveled the country looking for new art directors and new copywriters. And I was there for about 19 years, which was great. But my background in architecture, or my love of architecture, started there at the University of Texas. And now I'm actually a docent here in Chicago for the Chicago Architecture Center. I do the river cruises, which I love doing. And I'm also an interpreter with the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. And I do tours at Frank Lloyd Wright's Roby House down in Hyde Park on the campus of the University of Chicago, which I absolutely love doing as well. So,
So let's dive into architecture, for example. So
okay.
architecture, I think some of us lay people take it for granted, the structuring and the creativity that goes into it. And so you think about, Frank Lloyd Wright, you just mentioned, who has great work. I mean, I'm not a stone's throws away. I live in Brownsville, right to Hyde
Oh,
Park.
right.
And Hyde Park was second neighborhood growing up. I went to Kenwood Academy back in
Sure.
the day. So to see all that work and again, the antithesis of how it becomes beautified and is part of your nature and culture to see these architectural wonders. I mean, it's fantastic.
Right. Well, it is. And interestingly enough, people don't realize how much is involved in beauty and simplicity is a nice way of saying it. Because a house like the Roby House, which is the house that's right near where you are, you've never been on one of my tours. I'm offended all of a sudden because I've been doing it for 13 years and you've never been down there. That's not very nice.
No,
But
no,
when you think of
no,
it like a building,
I was too busy to be the knucklehead. I ain't saying here in front. I was.
I love it. But no, but the thing of it is, if you look at a building like that, and the layperson can look at it and say, well, that's a pretty building. And that's fine. If that's your opinion, that's a great opinion. But what people don't realize is how much is involved and how much sort of technical things have to go into something as simple as what you think is a home. And the Roby House is a good example, and it's hard to describe it without looking at it. But Frank Lloyd Wright, during this period of his career, there's a prairie style movement. It's like the 1900s through about 1910, maybe 1920. Man, more like 1910 for the most part. But the style was very horizontal in its design. And he used a very specific kind of brick in building these houses. They're very long and skinny bricks. But a
Mhm.
thing that he did, which is such a subtle thing that the average person wouldn't even think about, was he used two different types of mortar. Like the
Mm.
horizontal mortar was a contrasting color, like it was very thick and white compared to the color of the bricks. The mortar that was between each one of the bricks was painted the same color and it was flush with the bricks. So if you stand away from the building, all you see are the horizontal lines and none of the vertical lines. And that's a really subtle thing to do that not most bricklayers would do, but that's what he did. And he did subtle little things like that are things that create that mystique about why he was so genius in the things that he did.
And you know what's amazing about architecture? You have to know, obviously, where you are when you're building it from a weather standpoint.
Sure.
Because, for example, when I used to work at, this is not a knock on the place, I was news director for the radio station WKKC here in Chicago for Kennedy King College.
Hmm.
The first building had a lot of issues with leaking. And it
Okay.
had, when it rained, it rained in certain parts of the college campus, and then it started to really just start to deteriorate. You had to see all these buckets all over the place.
Oh, wow.
Come to find out, the original architect who built it was from California.
Oh, okay.
And so everything he learned from California, he brought to the Midwest, but that wasn't you got the end result of not, of course, using territorial situations from the
Right.
standpoint of weather was concerned. So
Right.
that's what got me fascinated into architecture. I could step over water pools depending on what kind of part of college I was going to.
Sure.
So when you look at the background of what's important, the foundation, where you are in the United States and beyond, then you have to God could take into consideration the weather.
Exactly, 100%. You know that one of the most famous buildings that Frank Lloyd Wright designed is Falling Water, and it's a wonderful story about Falling Water because the owners, that wanted this house. This was a second house for them. It was sort of a getaway retreat from Pittsburgh. It's about an hour and a half drive from Pittsburgh, I think, about an hour and a half drive. And they own this land along a river. And they said, we always like being near this river. It'd be great to be by the river. So it's relaxing, it's beautiful. And rather than putting the house by the river, he put it over the river. And so it hangs out over the river. And again, he had to do all the things by looking at that environment, how that was going to work, how the building's going to cantilever over the water. Is he going to do it the right way? And Frank Lloyd Wright, sadly, a few times didn't quite do all the things structurally that should have been done the right way. And that's an example, much like your example. This house, once it was finished, started leaning forward because it wasn't anchored into the hill that was next to the right way. And over time, they had to go back and actually, retrofit the house so it was done the right way. But being able to think of a house floating over a river as opposed to being right next to it is once again looking at the environment, looking at the owners, and trying to create a harmony that works for them as well as his vision. So you do have to think about all those things. And it's funny, the term organic architecture is a term we use quite a bit when we talk about Frank Lloyd Wright, because it's not just the building. And to your point, it's the environment in which the building is going to be built. It's the building itself and its ultimate design. It's the structure that makes the building work. But then for somebody like Frank Lloyd Wright, it's also the textiles, the interior, the furniture. He wants to design everything. It all should be one voice and all come together as one basic statement.
Outside of Frank Lloyd Wright, because every time I hear Frank Lloyd Wright, a lot of people like yourself who has done it, who's been in the business, always say like he's like the godfather of architecture. Outside of him, who else would you name?
Well, I would start naming contemporary architects after that. I mean, let me take that back. Mies van der Rohe is another pioneer in the world of architecture because he created the entire sort of mid-century modern style. The Bauhaus movement from Germany to here, and things like the campus of Illinois Institute of Technology down on 35th in that area. Some of the most famous buildings of his career are down there, as well as the IBM building, which is now called AMA Plaza here in Chicago, and the Seagram's building in New York. So he is actually wonderful. But another guy I like a lot right now is also Adrian Smith. Adrian Smith is the skyscraper builder. He's designed the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. And he also designed the Jeddah Tower, which was stopped in construction during COVID. And now it's going to be completed. It'll be the tallest building in the world when it's completed, which is exciting. So some are my
Very cool.
favorites. Yeah.
I told you you're a man of all seasons, man. You know, I mean, it is what it is. Let's go to the comment section. I saw people in there. Let's see what we have here. So, what's up, Snowman? That's Brian Snow, great sportscaster in his own right. Thank you so much, as talented broadcaster. Omar said, hello, King Base. Nice to see you again. Hello to my fellow bases. That's why I call my people who follow me bases. Nothing negative. We don't smoke.
Okay.
And good afternoon to Barbara Jean. Thank you for being here. I had to take it with a grain of salt. I know what Tom means. Well, Tom Travel is my former boss back at WLS Radio. I used to work here in Chicago. If you smash together Steve Harvey, the Reverend Al Sharpton, Einstein, and astronomer Carl Sagan, end up with Chris Bass and the baseline. Now, I don't like Steve Harvey. I can say that. No offense. I'm sure he's a wonderful person, but I don't like the brother. But okay, but I'll take the comment. And once again, my former president general manager, Tom Shadow. Thank you for that. Oh man, and my man Jed lives out in the Bay Area on the West Coast. Thank you for being. He said, "Fave styles of architecture." So we just talked. Right.
For me, I actually am a big fan of mid-century modern only because it's so designed to connect with the outdoors. You know, if you go to Palm Springs, there's some amazing homes in Palm Springs that are just open, and that wonderful non-connection between the inside and the outside. Many homes in Palm Springs have patios and floors into the main living area that are the same surface, and the wall that separates them is usually some sliding glass wall that can go all the way into the wall and disappear. I love that connection. You know, one of the things about Frank Lloyd Wright I liked a lot is his whole idea that homes should be connected to nature. Everything should just be one whole, basically one statement together. He'd always said that a house should nestle into the landscape and not dominate it. So it's a low profile home connected to nature. He had lots of windows that were right, creating what he called a light screen between the inside and the outside. And many of the elements that you see in a prairie style home are also reflected today in mid-century modern homes. That's sort of some of the elements that came from that, like having a fireplace that separates the living room and the dining room. So that area that you get it from both sides. But I guess that's one of my favorite styles would be mid-century modern and prairie. I still like the prairie style of architecture only because I build furniture and there are certain elements of what I do right now that sort of look back to the prairie style movement.
See, that's cool. See, growing up in Chicago, we see all these bungalows and other types of design and things like that, which again is territorial because you go to, say, the suburbs, it's a whole new different universe of homes and buildings. And again, when you look at where you are, like I was trying to convey to, I used to live in South Shore before I lived here. I lived in South Shore all my life before I moved here. And so when you get older, like I was in my 30s, I became the old head to some of the teenagers there. And I was trying to let them know there's a world outside of 4 blocks. If you just take time out to go outside your neighborhood and go into other neighborhoods and go downtown Chicago and even neighborhoods like say Hyde Park, like you mentioned, or Logan Square or something like that, and just see and get a whole different feel, atmosphere of how these neighborhoods operate.
Yeah. Well, again, for me, that's one of the benefits of my dad's military career. Not only did I see more than just one part of Houston, but I saw all these other cultures. I saw, again, Georgia, Alabama, Washington State, Oklahoma, Okinawa. I mean, all those things were great opportunities for me to see there's a whole lot more than just the small neighborhood that I originally grew up in. And I have neighbors. Some of the neighbors that I grew up with are still the same neighbors that are still there in the house that my parents bought in 1957. And some of them have had wonderful experiences and traveled, but I pretty much think I've traveled more than many of the neighborhoods and many of the neighbors in that neighborhood, because I have done quite a bit of traveling, not only with my dad's military career, but on my own since I've lived here in Chicago.
The traveling with your dad and the family, was that kind of like a precursor to you traveling now?
Absolutely. I mean, it gave me a little more comfort to be in a new environment. And again, the whole idea of having to go to a brand new school every 2 years and create new friendships and make new connections, you become more comfortable doing that the more you do it. And we did it quite a bit growing up. So when I moved here and started traveling on my own, I remember going to Germany once for business. My company sent me to Germany by myself. I didn't speak a lick of German, obviously. And I'm getting on a plane for the first time, going over to Europe for the first time. And I wasn't freaked out by it. And I somehow read a bunch of books on how to do this, how to do that. it was a great experience. And then I started going on a much more regular basis and just loved it. I love traveling to Europe when I can. I mean, I haven't since COVID started, but I'd
Mhm.
like to get back over there again.
Every Army brat or military brat I speak to,
I'm
they
an Army
always
brat.
talked about. I say what?
I'm an Army brat for sure.
Okay, there you go. So every person I speak to, military brat, Army brat, whatever, they always tell me that when they were coming up and moving from different cities or even countries, that it was hard to maintain friendships because you're uprooted, like you said, for every 1 or 2 years or so. So
Absolutely.
again, that goes back to now that I listen to your backstory to see you do all these different things. The one thing comes to mind with to me for you, Wayne, is adaptability.
Mhm. Well, you had to. You absolutely had to. We went. I lived, like I said, I've named all those states that we lived in before. But again, you go to a school for maybe 2 years. You're in the eighth. I was in the eighth grade for one semester, and then I was gone to another school. And I didn't have until I got to high school and spent all my last 3 years in one school. My friends or my friend network changed quite a bit. And when you'd leave one military base and go somewhere else, you might try to stay connected, but we didn't have cell phones in those days and nobody wrote letters really in those days. So at the end of the day, you sort of knew that you weren't going to see those friends again once you left and went to another military base. So my high school years were my years where I really made the connections. And another goofy thing that I did that was part of my background is I worked at Six Flags when I lived in Houston. I started when I was a junior, between my junior and senior year in high school. I started working at Six Flags. The park was called Astro World, and I worked there for 5 summers, all the way through college. And that was a
Mm.
whole different group of friends. And some of those friends are actually still friends of mine today, which is kind of cool. I live in Chicago now, but every time I get back to Houston, I still try to reconnect with some of my Astro World friends, which is a lot of fun. And again, Facebook has helped in that regard quite a bit as well. I still connect with some of those folks because the amusement park is gone, but there's a Facebook page for all of us old folks that used to work there.
So you worked at the amusement park. What was some of your responsibilities?
I was in the games department initially. You know,
Hmm.
the 3 balls for a quarter, win your girlfriend a prize, all that stuff. So I was a carnival. I called myself a carnival barker on my
Oh
resume
yeah.
when I got out of college. But I did that for the first year, and then I was a supervisor of the attractions department. I basically supervised all the other folks during that period. But I was in attractions. Attractions was the games, the arcade machines, things like the guess your weight booth, and all those various things. So I didn't drive the rides. I didn't drive the roller coasters. I was in the games department, which I loved quite a bit because it was all about personality. You had to connect with the people in the park, you know, and engage with them a lot. So again, that also benefited me.
So you mentioned about becoming in charge of the other games, and you mentioned before about being in business for 19 years and going from the business side to creative side. Where did you personally see, or maybe it's like just being you, the leadership side of you? Because
Mhm.
apparently they had to see that in order for you to be moved to an area where you can show your leadership at.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I'm a type A from hell, sadly. I mean,
Oh,
I very much control the
preach.
big picture. Some of my friends find me annoying about that as well, but I think that's part of it. I think sort of the independence I gained in my military brat days sort of programmed me to be able to not only run and guide things the way I think they should be run or guided, but also help other people learn to do the same. And so my job at Six Flags as a supervisor was a real benefit to me. When I got to Leo Burnett, I was sort of an independent guy doing my thing in my department. But when I started becoming a recruiter for the creative department, my last 6 years, my job was not only to find young people to bring them in, but help work with another one of my associates to manage the young people we did hire. We had a young program, and those students or those young employees that came in, we sort of guided them for about a year to a year and a half while they're at the agency until they moved into a permanent location. But I think it all came from just, again, all my experiences sort of building up together gave me not only the independence, but the understanding of how things should run and how to motivate other people to do it.
So again, you're 19 years going from the business side to creativity and recruiting new talent. So after that, where did Wayne Johnson go from there?
Well, because I was in the creative department, and even though I was a recruiter, I was still doing creative work on my own on the side. So when I left Burnett, I started just basically freelancing on my own. And so I ran my own, and I still do, as a matter of fact. But I'm a web designer and a graphic designer in my laptop world. Whenever I'm sitting right here at this desk that I'm at right now, I'm basically designing websites for clients or doing advertising for clients. And I've got a nice mix of clients from bars and restaurants here in the city to a lawyer, interior designer. I've got 2 interior designers on the West Coast, one down in Florida. I've got a lawyer in Florida. I've got a woman who teaches karate to young kids in New York. So I've got a nice connection, some doctors here as well. And I like it. It's fun. And that keeps me busy. But as a freelancer, it gives me the freedom as well, which is nice to do some of the other things that I have a passion for, like furniture building in the basement, or doing my tour guide work with the Chicago Architecture Center or the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. I can sort of make my schedule based on what I need to do for clients and what I want to do for these organizations as well.
Well, being a freelancer again and getting to know you as we do this interview, you just seem like a free spirit. So you should not, and just getting to know you for the short time listening to you, to be bogged down by this, that, and the third. It seems as though that life is more than that. As I read in the introduction at the beginning of the program,
Sure.
that you have all these irons in the fire, and I would assume much more, because you're able to once again adapt, and you're able to, excuse me, what I would say, have a free, open mind.
Sure. Well, that's true. And I also have, sadly, I don't ever sleep, which is not a good thing. But a lot of my design life, I wake up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and I can't sleep, and I'll try to sleep and I can't. So sometimes from about 4 until about 8 or 9 in the morning, I do a lot of the design stuff I have to get done. And then my day is open to do the other things I have a passion for. But also, it is being a free spirit, sort of designing your schedule around what's important to you. I mean, you set a set of priorities. And if the priority this week is I want to go do some river cruise tours for some people, or this Saturday I want to go down to Hyde Park and give tours, then I make sure I get my work done before that. So I have the freedom to do that. And one of the things I don't get to do that much, because I love actually entertaining, actually cooking for people and doing entertaining at my house. And I haven't done a lot of that this year. I've been running back and forth to Houston for a lot of personal reasons, but I haven't been able to sort of entertain up here the way I'd like to. And I want to get back into that this fall, I hope. That's one of the things I want to set a priority to.
Well, so let's see. So when did the whole cooking area come for you during that time? Because as I was putting the show together, and I was telling them, asking, well, who's going to have on for Wednesday? I said, Wayne Johnson. Wait. Cooking? NBC Wayne Johnson? Yes, that Wayne Johnson. So let's get into that part of your life. When did that start to come to play for you?
Well, let's see. That's a long story, I think. Let's just start from the beginning. Growing up, I had 4 brothers, as I mentioned already. We had a big family, and almost all of my relatives lived in Houston. My mother's sister was there, and 2 of her my mother's sister and her half brother and half sister lived there. My father's 3 brothers lived there, but ours was the largest family, a family of 7. And we frequently had people over to our house for the big events like Thanksgiving or Christmas and those big meals. And my mother was loved to cook and loved to cook for crowds and was really good at cooking for crowds. And I sort of picked some of that up from my mother to begin with. And then when I moved to Chicago, I sort of brought that with me. I loved entertaining. I loved being around people. I think my days of being at Six Flags, Astro World, and my days of just traveling was that social part of me that just loved being social. So I learned from my mother first. And then, much like all these other shows that are on TV, I started watching cooking shows on TV and getting more into cooking and getting more into entertaining. So I started doing a lot of entertaining. And I was a bit of a social chairman here in Chicago during my years at Burnett, because that was a huge 1,500 employees. You have a lot of friends there, and you do a lot of socializing with friends. So I learned on my own. Truth of the matter is. And then the Today Show happened, and I tell you that story if you want to hear the full-blown Today Show
please.
story. But
Absolutely.
I loved to entertain. I loved to cook. I loved to make things. And so one of my friends asked me if I would make a cake for his partner who was in town from Italy. And I said, yeah. And rather than making one cake, I made 4, and I built the little apparatus that had 4 different tiers on it. And so I made a cheesecake, a regular cake, and I forget what I made. But I made it all, and for some bizarre reason, I decided to film it. And it was a Super 8 camera, I think, at the time, as opposed to anything digital. So I filmed me bringing this cake into the party, or this series of cakes into the party. And then I was visiting one of my friends who had been my boss previously at Leo Burnett, and I happened to have the camera with me. And I said, you know what, I just made this cake for a friend of mine. I want to show this to you. And she looked at it and she said, you need to be on that contest. I was like, well, what contest? She goes, the Today Show was having a contest for who's going to replace Martha Stewart, because Martha Stewart went to jail. And I said, yeah, right, as if. And she goes, no, all you have to do is send in a video and write a little essay, and they're going to pick some contestants, and they're going to be on the Today Show, and they're going to compete to see who could be the next Martha Stewart. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. And this was on a Tuesday. And I went home that night, and I went online to look it up to see what it was all about. And if you wanted to do that, you in fact had to put together a 1-minute video a 500-word essay, and you had to submit it all by Friday, 3 days later from the date that I had actually been told about this from my old
Right.
boss. And then, suddenly I said, yeah, well, I'm not doing that. And then I went to bed, and then a light bulb came on in my head. I'm like, well, why don't you do this, Wayne? What the hell? What do you got to lose? So I took that little snippet of video of me bringing that cake into this birthday party, and then I shot a bunch of other pieces of video all around my apartment because I had built a chess set and I built a picnic table in the backyard and I knitted some sweaters and I cooked some dinners and I filmed all this stuff and I put it into a 1-minute video because I learned how to do video editing when I worked for that. And I built and then in those days you had to submit a videotape, a VHS tape had to be
Right.
submitted to the contest. So I went down to my wood shop and I built a box out of wood for the VHS tape to go into. And then I wrote my essay as a little book that was the same size as a VHS tape. And all of that, I packaged it all up and I FedExed it out on a Thursday night, so it arrived on Friday morning when it was supposed to get there. And lo and behold, they picked me and 2 women to compete in this contest. And they flew us to New York, and over a 3-day period, you had to do a cooking segment, you had to do a craft segment, you had to do a floral arrangement segment, you had to do a Q&A, and then America voted. And America, for some bizarre reason, voted for me, and I ended up winning the contest. And all I won from it was the opportunity to go back to the Today Show and do a few segments. And I did 5 additional segments on the Today Show, and it was great. It was when Katie, Matt, Alan, Ann were on the show at the time, and I developed a really cool connection with them when I was there. But then after the 5 or 6 segments I did were over, that was it. But the local NBC affiliate that was the general manager of which actually had worked at Leo Burnett Company and knew me, he called up and said, Wayne, do you want to do that on our show? We could put you in the news for a couple minutes once a week and you could do it and be a lot of fun. I went, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So it wasn't a career. I mean, it wasn't something I did for a living. It all came from just my passion and my enjoyment of entertaining and cooking. And then fortunately, NBC Chicago gave me 10 years of being able to do this once a week for about 2 or 3 minutes on their show. And it was a lot of fun. I got a lot of ego boosts from it. And it was great. But I still was a freelance graphic designer on the side. I mean, not on the side, but I mean, this job was on the side, but I was still
Right.
doing my job as a graphic designer and a web designer. And then when that ended at NBC, I got a few random calls here and there. I did a segment on Good Morning America once, and I also did a few on WLS with the what was the name of the show? My brain just stopped all of a sudden. But with Val and
Ryan?
Val and Ryan. And I was on their show for about, I think I did 4 or 5 of their shows too, which is a lot of fun. But anyway, and so then after that, I started doing my own thing on YouTube and on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and anywhere else that I have time to do it. But it's all sort of when I have time to do it. And once again, you're thinking about setting priorities. If I could really have built my YouTube channel aggressively and had it like 20, 30,000 viewers, I really would be focused on that. But I didn't. It only has about 3,000 viewers right now, which is not bad. But it's not the numbers you really need to make it a profitable area. Right now, it's still just sort of a fun thing to do as opposed to something that actually makes any money for me. I mean, you can make money from YouTube if you got 20 or 30 followers and every one of your videos gets about 10 to 20,000 viewers, but mine don't. So I just do it for fun.
And nothing wrong with that. We're the better for it. Jade also types hyper vigilant, creative mindset, inspiring interview, but you just answered my question about no sleep. Very inspiring. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Let me share this with you and people may not know. So a couple of nights ago, I couldn't sleep. And so I got on the show here and just started to vent about what was on my mind. It was very on my mind. I've been up like since 2 in the morning. I got on here on social media like around 5 a.m. and I just started to vent. And people started to, people out there who also couldn't sleep came into the comment section. And I said, well, why are you up? And everybody gave their comments about not sleeping. And so I felt your pain when you mentioned about not sleeping, because for some reason, that type of idle time, sometimes you may have your most creative spurts.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think your mind is, the reason I don't sleep is because my mind's racing and I'm thinking about something else. And I probably average maybe 4, maybe 5 hours of sleep on the average night. And I've been trying to push myself maybe to take a nap here and there, but that's not really working very well either. But I read something somewhere about it. Naps are a very good thing, especially in my advanced age. We'll see what happens with that. But I do. I get a lot of great ideas late at night when I, and it's, I'm thinking. One of the things I love to do is build things in my wood shop. Excuse
Yes,
me.
sure.
And when I'm building something, and that gets back to your point earlier about buildings and architecture and what goes on behind the scenes and inside behind the bricks and inside the walls.
Hmm.
When I'm designing something that I'm going to build, and right now I'm working on a china cabinet for my dining room, there are so many things that you have to make work in your head because you're creating an original design. Like, how are the drawers going to go here, and how are the sides going to be like this, and how many shelves are you going to put there? Are you going to put dots in? Are you going to put holes so you can make the shelves adjustable? So those things are always rolling around in my head before I ever pick up pen and paper or Adobe Illustrator and keyboard. But a
Hmm.
lot of those things, I'm designing it in my head over and over and over again. And certain times I'll wake up in the middle of the night and go, that drawer won't work like that. And I'll start thinking about it, and I'll start sort of imagining a better way to do it. And then sometimes I'll just go ahead and get up and come back in here and sit in my sunroom here and make some changes and adjustments to it. So again, I do think some of the reason I don't sleep is because my mind is always racing and thinking about something else.
Well, always, because from people that I've talked to who are creatives, we all operate differently, but somewhat the same. And so when you look at people who are creative, they find a way to obviously get that out, and they're in a thought process to the point where, for example, when everybody else is sleeping, you're awake. It's kind of like the world is kind of quiet,
Hmm.
and you can think on a more quieter basis
Right.
from the standpoint of the rush and bush of course, morning traffic and people getting to work and coming from work and everything else. Seems like that lull
Hmm.
of overnights going into the early morning seems to be a whole different universe within itself.
Sure. Well, I mean, think about that. At night, even though, like, at 10 o'clock at night, you could be sitting here, like in my case, in my sunroom. And you're right, the energy that's going on outside, it may be quiet out there, but there's still a noise energy that happens when you're not in your bedroom and sort of like trying to be just quiet. When you're in bed and you wake up at 3 in the morning, it is dead quiet all around you. You hear nothing, and your neighbors
Hmm.
aren't moving, they're not breathing, they're not talking. So it's absolute quiet. And your brain does have much more opportunity to sort of, it's like a bottle of syrup. It just sort of starts spreading out in every direction, and you start thinking more clearly. I think I agree with you 100%.
Oh man, I cut my talk radio teeth on night radio. So when I was back at
Mhm.
WLS AM, I did overnights. And I did overnights in a whole different universe of people in that third shift was getting that quiet type of time. And there's a whole different universe of people out there. And
Right.
so because when to worry about too many breaks, you get extemporized more when you have callers coming in and you're not rushed by the clock. You can have more thought process. I've always liked that. I don't take anything away from the program clock because that's how we all got paid, obviously, in
Right.
any type of broadcasting form. But that overnight, when say you only take 2 breaks in an hour, and you have all those people calling in, and it seemed like a more of a potpourri thought process. So when you mentioned about not sleeping, which I have been doing for a while myself, it's like I should start a program of non-sleepers because it's a lot of us out there from time to time. So
Right.
again, just the fact that you mentioned about the whole creativity, I completely agree. What would be your perfect meal to prepare?
Oh gosh. Ah, that is so difficult to answer. I am from Texas, and so I love barbecue. I really love barbecue. And so I
Mm,
have a smoker that's back on my balcony, and it's one my parents gave me, which I'll treasure forever. It's like a
yes.
giant dorm room refrigerator. It's just a big old rectangle. And
Hmm.
so I make my own dry rub mixes. I've got separate dry rub mix for beef, for pork, for chicken, and vegetables. So I would make one. I have a brisket recipe that is just slow cooks, low and slow, 12 hours plus. So a brisket, a Texas barbecue is actually one of my favorite things to make, with like a homemade apple pie at the end, and maybe some fresh
Mm.
homemade guacamole at the beginning, and then just brisket, baked beans, coleslaw, and some mashed sweet potatoes, or a potato salad. I love doing that. And then the other side of things I like to do is I love making desserts. I'm actually really, one of my favorite things to do is desserts, because I think dessert is art, because a
Yes.
dessert can be absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. So I make these crazy cakes during the holidays. I make great cheesecakes. I've got right now at the time I've got a pumpkin flavored cheesecake that's just to die for in my book. And apple pie, sweet potato pies. I love making sweet potato pies during the holidays. Very back to my mom and my mom's recipes. But other dishes, that's one of my favorite things to cook is doing a barbecue for people. That's great. But I love making Italian dishes too. I'm pretty good with pastas as well. But that would be my favorite pick would be a barbecue because it brings people together in a very fun social way.
Man, my mom and dad, my dad was alive, God rest his soul. My mom is still with us. So when we had barbecues, it was like, the tag team in the kitchen. So I sit back and watch them as a child. And I remember my dad used to always get the St. Louis cut ribs. And so he would come back from the store, get all these ribs and everything else. So my dad would pull the membrane off the back of them, all the fat off it, right? And then my mom and dad would season them. And then we marinate overnight. And then we'll start cooking, say 5 a.m. the next morning. And then, like you said, low and slow and go from there. So it's funny. I'm watching these cooking shows or come on PBS or on networks or like that. Let's see, I think it was Steve Reichland on PBS. So Steve one day talked about pulling the membrane. I'm like, oh man, I know that, Doc. I mean, my parents did it. So what have you seen on television that reminds you of, say, your mother cooking in the kitchen? It's like, oh man, I remember that.
I'm trying to think. That's a good question. My mother and father weren't quite the same as yours in terms of my dad thought he was a barbecue cook, and that was about all he could do is deal with the barbecue. But even that, he wasn't great. I have to just say, he just pretty much let my mom be in charge of all the food stuff.
Yes.
But what do I see? That's a good question. It's when I see any of these Southern shows where they're showing sweet potato pie, that makes me just feel great because that is the one dish that always reminds me of mom and my aunt as well. My aunt used to make those little pecan tassies, which are little tiny little, like no bigger than that, like a shot glass full of like sweet potato mix as well. They were really just pecan on top. I love that. But yeah, watching Southern shows just brings me back to Texas and Houston, or watching some of the ones in Louisiana because I like Cajun food as well. A good gumbo, making a roux. Watching somebody make a roux reminds me very much of how my mom used to make roux. And I love making gumbos. Gumbos are one of my favorite things to do during the wintertime as well.
When you watch these cooking shows over the years, and I hate Bobby Flay, me personally.
I hate him too, as a matter of fact.
Thank you, my brother. Yeah, I can't stand that rap bastard. I'm sorry, man. I just never was a big fan. And plus,
I started disliking him when he was on. I'm sorry. Go ahead to finish your.
When you go ahead, please go ahead.
He was on Top Chef once, and he was competing against another one of the high-end chefs. I forget it was an Asian chef, and Bobby won the competition, but he jumped up on his prep table and was standing on his butcher block that he cooked on, and the Asian chef was absolutely offended. He goes, "This is a profession. This is not how you deal with." And it was just he was like a frat boy. And him being a frat boy was not only annoying then, but just every other time. And I went to his restaurant in New York. I forget which one it was, but it was the Edge or Mesa. It was Mesa. I went to Mesa in New York. And I got there, and I was there with 2 other friends. And in one of those typical, I don't want to point specifics, but we get there, we had a reservation, and immediately they wanted to put us at a table up on the 2nd floor when there was a main floor that was only partially full. And we sort of protested that a little bit. And then they gave us another table, which was right by the swinging door that went to the kitchen. And then I finally blew a little gasket. And I said, you know what? We have a reservation. There are plenty of tables in the middle of the room. We don't want traffic, and we want 2nd floor. Could you please just honor that request? And begrudgingly, the 3rd table was an acceptable table. But I mean, those elements sort of left not a great taste in my mouth about him or about his restaurant. So it's my honest opinion.
You mentioned about the whole cutting board thing. Now I know it's the same story, or he did it again. My wife and myself were great friends of Iron Chef. Love Iron Chef. So they had Iron Chef America. So they were promoting it coming into New York. That was it?
Yeah, that was
I saw the exact same show. That rat bastard. So I remember that because he lost to, I think, Morimoto.
Yes, that's what this one was. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I remember that. Right. And so Morimoto was pissed at Robert because Morimoto worked for Robert De Niro.
Right.
And his restaurants, his chef and everything else. So man, I was like, come on, man. We can't have that type of display.
Thank you. So we're right there in the same place on that one.
Oh man. Well, you preach to the choir, doctor. So outside of the rat bastard, or outside of him, what are some of the TV chefs that you like to watch?
Ina Garten. I love Ina Garten. I love her. She's great because she is not only She doesn't take herself too seriously. She makes great dishes, and her favorite line is, "You can substitute this if you want." I mean, it's like
Go ahead.
she's so laid back and so easygoing. I really enjoy watching her, and it's funny. I look back at some of the old Julia Child ones too, and I just
Oh,
sort of enjoy some of that. And Jacques Pepin, I look at some of his as well. I used to like watching him quite a bit. But absolutely, Ina Garden as the Barefoot Contessa, I just think she is one of the most easygoing and very well spoken people on television in terms of recipes and cooking. So that's
look,
my
I remember watching Julia Child as a child myself because the times when I would fake having a cold so I couldn't go to school, and so I would watch TV at my grandparents' house, and so at 1 o'clock I turned to PBS and watched Julia Child here in
hmm
Chicago,
hmm
and I only remember cooking with she always loved butter. You mentioned
Yeah,
about the French cooking with butter,
lots better.
and I remember one time she was bitching and moaning about margarine. I don't know why that stood out, but she hated margarine, man. I
Right,
mean, if
right.
anybody could start like a hashtag I hate margarine, it should have been the great Julia Child.
Well, she was all about authentic French cooking. I mean, they didn't even have margarine, barely even had margarine when she was doing all of her learning and training to be a chef over in France. So, and I
Mm,
agree with her. My mother uses margarine all the time, and I don't. I use butter 100%. But almost every recipe my mother had margarine in it, so I had to substitute butter and make sure it still worked the same way. But yeah, margarine it's a thing. I don't agree with
yeah, you're
it.
right.
No.
That's another thing we can't stand.
Yeah.
Let's see. Jed types Yan Can Cook over my favorite, Martin Yan.
Martin Yan was good too. Yeah, I liked watching him, and Emeril Lagasse as well. Emeril Lagasse was fun to watch him with his Cajun cooking and his Louisiana cooking. Oh, and there was another. What was that chef's name? Uh, Paul Prudhomme. Paul Prudhomme and his
Oh yes.
yeah, and his sort of Cajun cooking as well was sort of fun to watch. Yeah, I love all that ethnic cooking more than anything else. It's somebody that's sort of just a mainstream cook. I don't get into as much, but a lot of ethnic cooking just challenges me. I'm not very good with Asian cuisine in terms of cooking it, but I do love it. I mean, I can do a stir fry. We talked about earlier
Right.
about doing fried rice and things like that. I can handle a wok, but just the basics things. I mean, for me, using a wok is just throwing a bunch of fresh ingredients in there and tossing them in, throwing some chicken stock, cornstarch, and some soy sauce in there, and you got a nice little thick sauce, and you're good to go. But I don't do really fancy Asian cooking, which I would love to get more into.
When I became a teenager again, I was still watching cooking shows on PBS Channel 11, and one of my favorites, God rest his soul, was Justin Wilson.
Oh yeah,
Now, this is what freaked me out watching it when I was a teenager. So in the beginning, he's narrating in the beginning, like growing up
hmm
growing up in Baton Rouge, I learned how to cook through my mother's eyes, and now I pass on to you. My name is Justin Wilson. He come out, hey, how y'all do?
right,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, wait a minute, we're having the code switch.
Right, exactly. Who was doing that intro?
Right, exactly right.
What did he say? What was his famous line? Like "I guarantee" or something
I,
like that. He would say,
I guarantee,
"I
right.
guarantee."
Yeah. And again, these personality cooks. And so, see, that's what I liked about the cooking shows. The cooks were personalities. I mean, they could
Right.
really sell it.
Sure.
The Galabin Gourmet was another one
Yep.
in
Yep.
his
I
time.
remember him
So,
well.
so when these people were doing their thing, it was fun to watch and even challenging to the point where maybe I might go in the kitchen
hmm
and not
hmm
hopefully burn up the kitchen, literally, if I could try to take some of the elements. And that's great thing I love about technology and social media and having a device like this is that you go straight to your phone and
Right.
pick up what you want and then go to a YouTube channel, like your YouTube channel, and go step by step and
hmm
then break it down. So if you yourself, being a younger demographic person,
Not,
and
not so young.
well, look, man, I ain't gonna say it. I'm old ass. I ain't gonna sit here in front.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm close to you than you think.
You probably are. That's a whole different conversation, but right. So, someone who was a younger ilk, if you was a younger ilk,
hmm
what would inspire your younger self to go on YouTube to watch somebody cook?
Oh boy. Well, I think it goes back to what you're saying. I think it needs to be personality driven and entertaining because there are so many people now that are cooking on television, be it on YouTube or the Food Network or Instagram or TikTok. I mean, right now, everybody and their mother is on TikTok doing some type of food cooking video. And so
Right.
it really, to your point, going back in time, it needs to be much more personality driven where you're entertained by the person more so than by who they are and what they're about more so than what they're actually making. their personality has to be the driving force, not necessarily them just cooking or creating things.
Got that right. Let's see. Go to the comment section. What's up, Eric? Eric says Justin Wilson introduced me
Yes.
to crawfish boils.
Yes, yes. Those are fun. I've been to a few of those here in Chicago, amazingly. Now, that happens all the time down in Texas, but going to someplace where they just bring out a giant page or a piece of wrap onto a table and just pour everything down and just chow down is such an experience. And a lot of people up north have no idea what that's about or what it's like. But, crawfish boil is a lot of fun, really a lot of fun.
Man, look, cooking shows. So I remember in the 90s, Julia Child was doing a show introducing young chefs. And that's when I first saw Emeril Lagasse. He had to be like in his mid-20s at the time. So they're doing the show, and he's talking about crawdaddies and how to prepare the crawdaddy boil and how to dump it and everything. It got all the seasoning and the corn, the potatoes, and everything else. And I must say, I had a delightful experience listening to the following. So here's a 25-year-old Emeril Lagasse talking to Julia Child. Now, Julia got to get the crawdaddy here. You got to suck the head. Make sure you take the head off and suck the head. No, let me get this straight. I have to suck the head. Yes, I mean, I'm sorry. That tickled me, doctor. I'm sorry. Just to hear Julia Child say, suck the head. So, it's very flavorful. So I mean,
you did a pretty good impression.
Yeah. Oh, man. I go way back to the 70s watching Julia Child, doctor. So for her to say suck the head, it is flavorful. I'm sorry. That went all through me. But
that's
again, watching Emeril Lagasse at 25 years old was amazing.
And I think when he first started out, he didn't pronounce the E on the end of his name. He was Emeril Lagasse, and then as he became more popular, he expanded to Emeril Lagasse, which is kind of funny. It sounded better. But I do remember, a side note to that, I do remember still Dan Aykroyd doing his version of Julia Child on Saturday Night Live, where he cuts himself.
Right. Bleeding profusely all over the place, right?
Oh, God. I still remember that. It's hilarious.
Oh, man. Well, you never immortalize when somebody really starts, to imitate you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love that movie too, Being Julia or whatever it was called, I forget. But where that one woman did, basically she blogged every single recipe in Julia Child's book, which I thought was really a wonderful idea. As a matter of fact, I copied that concept where I made a multi-course dinner using only recipes from her cookbook. It was a lot of fun one night, which was a marathon too. It took a lot of time to do it and create it, but it was kind of fun.
Man, that's great. Another thing that I do not like on social media, and I know for entertainment purposes only, but it's a colossal waste of food. We have these people who so-called cook, and they get like a waffle iron and say they're going to make these dishes. So they put breakfast sausage meat in the waffle iron, and they crack eggs, and they put it down. And if you notice, the whole tagline, oh, it's so good.
Right.
Yeah, everything is so damn good. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So it's like everything. I mean, I had to stop watching because I would get too upset. To see all that food go to waste, and then they never eat it.
No,
they never eat it. They cut off at the end.
Well, that's part of it. That's how people are trying to milk social media for their own financial benefit. I mean, they create these ridiculous recipes at times, and they stretch the entire thing out to the maximum amount of time you're allowed, so that not only do you not see the end of it, and you're sort of forced to go search their site to find more of their videos, or you've got to see their part 2 if it's linked to it. But it's all just an effort to keep you watching, and again, ultimately for them to make money from the process. And I find them beyond offensive. It's not even about the wasting money. I just find them just stupid and annoying. And I frequently will just hit on them as you're cycling through pages on Instagram or on TikTok, and I just immediately go, no, this is one of those dumb, stupid commercials. I'm not watching this. Or
exactly,
things.
Barbara Jeans. Those videos are
Thank
stupid.
You, Barbara.
I fast forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Exactly. Peace, 2 fingers. That's right. Absolutely. The woodworking you do. Let's get into a little bit more of that. So you mentioned before about shelves and creating stuff like that. So what if you were to create, say a 4-level shelf combined with the mirror frame? What kind of wood would you use, and what would go into that?
Well, say that again. A four shelf cabinet with a mirror frame. You mean a mirror on the door or the mirror in the back?
On top.
Oh, the mirror on the top. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Well, that sounds very traditional to me. So I might actually build it. If I were building it for somebody else, I might build it out of oak. But if I was building it for myself, I'd probably build it out of something maybe like a mahogany, much deeper, richer.
Mm-hmm.
But what I build in my house, I use cherry a lot. I love building with cherry, and
Mm.
I use another type of wood called wenge. It's a dark African wood. It's very very dark. It's not black, but it's very very dark with streaks of black in it. And I usually contrast that with cherry wood, which means I'll make something out of cherry and I'll put the wenge right in the middle of it as an accent element.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're describing sounds very traditional, almost like an arts and crafts sort of thing. So oak would be very appropriate for that in my book.
Oh yeah, and again, when you're talking about traditional, I think sometimes if people like traditional, that's fine. That's the reason why I asked the question. But also, you might want to open your mind, like I said, for you being a free spirit, open your
Mhm.
mind to some different ideas outside of traditional type of
Sure.
things.
Well, see, another way, if you were to ask me to do that as a modern interpretation, then what I might do is I might actually make 4 shelves that mount to the wall and don't have any sides to them, and the mirror
Hmm.
goes above it as well. So it's like 3 shelves floating in the wall with a mirror above it, as a modern interpretation of a 4 drawer or a 4 shelf cabinet with a mirror. And that I would start using more interesting woods for something like that as opposed to an oak. I would do that completely out of cherry wood or something like that, or even a mahogany, making it dark and rich. One of the things I like to do is I don't like putting colors on stains. Whatever natural color of wood I usually use a clear stain for it or a clear finish on it. So if you want a dark piece of furniture, then I use a dark piece of wood. I don't buy this kind of wood and put a dark stain on it. I
Hmm.
make it. Let the wood sort of speak for itself in terms of its color and its density.
Let's see. Let's go back to the comment section. Hello, Lisa London. Lisa London, how you doing? Says, hi, gentlemen. Can Wayne share a simple recipe with us
Hmm.
before he goes?
Boy, that's tough.
Oh yeah.
Geez. Well, one of my favorite. Okay, here's a simple recipe that. Well, I'm not sure how much of a great recipe it is, but I love making guacamole. And a simple recipe for me with guacamole is simply take a whole avocado, slice it, put it into a bowl. Take about a fourth of a cup of white onion, chop that up, put it in a bowl. Take about half of a tomato, seed it, chop it, put that in the bowl. Get 2 limes and squeeze 1 whole lime in there. Mix it up. Good amount of salt and pepper, and then chop all that up. If you like spice, take 1 jalapeno, seed it, chop it, put that in as well, and that makes a great guacamole. It's got just enough sort of additional flavors in it without being a salad, but it's nice and crunchy and flavorful. That goes really well. I have really simple recipe. Here's a simple recipe that amuses people that find it surprising. But my pie crust recipe is very very basic. It is 1 1/4 cups of flour, 6 ounces of icy cold butter, or 6 tablespoons of butter, and 3 ounces of cream cheese. That's
Mm.
all. Those 3 elements, I put those in a food processor. I turn it on. I let it go until it turns into a dough all by itself. It comes together. I take that out. I flatten it. I put it in the refrigerator for an hour. It makes a perfect pie crust every time. So those are 2 recipes. You got 2
There
for
you
the
go.
price of 1.
See,
How's that?
see, I'm telling you. See, the man can do it. I'm telling you. Don't sleep on him. I'm telling you. Jed ties that we are the same philosophy on stain. Why hide the beauty of the wood grain?
That's right, Jed. 100%. 100%. If you want dark furniture, use dark wood. If you want light furniture, use light wood. Don't put a stain on something, and don't certainly if you're building something from scratch, don't paint it. I mean, if you're going to do something, if you want to paint something, then you use very inexpensive wood, and you don't worry about it. But I love the look of natural woods, and dark and light can speak for themselves.
I mentioned the question to you about your favorite food. You mentioned about ribs, and you mentioned
Mhm.
about guacamole and having dessert like apple pie. So that's the perfect meal for you. So your travels of all over the world, where would you eat this perfect meal at if you had to pick a place outside of Houston in your hometown?
What city or what restaurant in what city?
Let's go with city. Let's go with city. Let's say you prepare it in the city, but what city will you really get the ambiance of being there, enjoying the city and the meal you prepared?
Oh wow, that's a challenge. I think San Francisco. I think San Francisco. I've got a really dear friend who I worked. She and I started at Leo Burnett together back in 1979, and she lives in San Francisco right now. She's got a great house and a great balcony on the back of the house, or a deck on the back. That'd be an
Mm.
amazing place to have just a really special meal because it's beautiful. It's a city. It's an urban environment, but at the same time, it's very quiet and remote in the back half of it. So I would enjoy that. Also, Palm Springs would be a great place for it as well. And then, what's the dish? Does it have to be a different dish? Good afternoon.
It could be a different dish. Oh yeah, I mean, look, man, you're the man of all seasons. Man, you can prepare what the hell you want to prepare. So It does that, but I just figured the whole rib thing and the whole everything else, if you had that ambiance of the meal and the atmosphere and where you want to be at to eat it.
Yeah. Well, actually, the truth of the matter is, my friend used to have a different house over on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and she had this great back area that just looked out into like this big field. It was just big, huge open space. That'd be a great place for a barbecue. But another dish I like to make though is a carbonara, like a pasta carbonara, and that would make more sense in San Francisco for sure. I love making a great fettuccine or spaghetti carbonara because I think that's just a wonderful dish and it comes together so easily and it's got so much flavor and it's so rich and so bad for you, but at the same time, it's so good.
Hey man, you know what time it is. A lot of stuff that's supposed to be good for you. Hey man, sometimes it's usually bad for you. So
Exactly.
that is the definitely spice of life. I mentioned about Jed earlier. That's out his way. That's in the Bay Area. Thinking
Yeah.
about San Francisco. So yeah, that's always good stuff.
Right.
Wayne, this has been more than fun. I have to have you back, and I know you're a man.
Wow.
Man, this is great, man. So I gotta have you back when you have time. Last question.
Yeah.
Before we part company, if you can invite 4 people to dinner, alive or not, who would they be and why?
Well, I would invite Barack and Michelle Obama, one, because I find them fascinating, and I find her more fascinating than him.
I've been told.
And then I would invite. Oh, that's 2. I got 2 more to go here. I would probably invite Diane Carroll because I find her
Nice.
fascinating as well, and she was innovative and wonderful. And then I'm trying to think who else would just fascinate me. I think maybe Frank Lloyd Wright. I think it'd be fun to see Frank Lloyd Wright. Just sort of he was in. I'm not sure I would enjoy having over for dinner because he's a fascinating human being. But also there are parts of his personality that I've always heard over time and reading about him that probably would make him a little more elitist and fun and entertaining than I would probably want him to be. But I would still be fascinating to listen to him and talk to him. So that might be my little dinner party. Those 3 plus 1.
That would do it. So the Obamas, you mentioned about Diane Carroll and Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
So is the added question because you're a cook, what would you serve?
Oh, geez. See how you are?
Yeah.
I would probably serve a multi-course meal. I would make some sort of appetizer that would be very light, but then I'd probably do a soup of some kind for the first course. Then I would probably do something like probably a chicken dish of some kind without it's something light and simple. When you're trying to do a dinner party for people, you want to make it look as effortless as possible, but at the same time, that means you've worked your tail off in advance to get it ready. So a soup is an awesome thing to make as one of the courses because you made the soup earlier in the day and it's good to go. I would do one of my cheesecakes. I have a bourbon mascarpone cheesecake that I make with fresh strawberries or fresh berry sauce on the side. That would be awesome. But the main dish might be something as simple as some sort of chicken dish that would be layered with something like asparagus on the side, just really basic and simple. A nice little sauce to go with the chicken and the asparagus, and then some other additional thing like, I don't know, maybe a starch to go with that. I'm not positive. You put me on the spot there on that situation.
It's what I do. Wayne, again, this has been great. Thank you so much. More information about you, sir. Where can people find you at?
It's easy to find me on YouTube at just Wayne Bites, at Wayne Bites. You can find me on any social media at Wayne Bites. You type that into YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Not Twitter. I don't use Twitter anymore. But Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. Just put in at Wayne Bites. You got me. Okay.
Well, look, I said this during the pregame. I want to say this publicly. For someone who's been a fan of your work for a while, I want to thank you for being out there because someone like myself, who was also in broadcasting, and I'm still doing broadcasting a little bit, more so social media, obviously these days now. But it was always cool to see on the weekend because I knew I was going to see something that's going to be fun. It was going to be uplifting. It was going to be cool. So when I saw that logo of Wayne's Weekend, I knew I was going to see something special. So I want to personally thank you for all the years of what you've done. It was very cool.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it very much. It was really fun. That went by so much faster than I thought it was gonna. That was amazing. In fact, that was a quick hour.
Hey man, I'm strong your ego. You're in the hands of the master, man.
Well, I enjoyed every minute of it.
Hey, look, man, it's like I'm like Dennis Haysbert, Allstate. So I tell you.
Well, thanks for making it so easy. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Thank you.
I'm glad. And once again, Barbara Jean, thank you. So that's the interview. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Barbara.
Look, it's him. I'm just here, dog. And this is the man right. Here's the man. 50 grand. A man for all seasons. The great Wayne Johnson. Thank you for being Wayne. Hang on one second, okay? Be right back.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Wayne. And so once again, that's why I love what I do. When you meet people you admire, you get a chance to get into the embodiment of their work and what they do. Also, just a newfound respect. You had respect from the beginning, but more of respect because you see the hard work that they go into behind the scenes that a lot of us are not privy to. Again, thank you, Wayne Johnson. And again, we do this every Wednesday when you congregate for CBI-Chris based interviews. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, and then 2 p.m. on Pacific time on the West Coast. And so join me when we congregate. You have to be there early if you get up, scratch, wash your hands, do something, whatever you got to do. Make sure you join me for Baseline, and that's at Saturday mornings. That's at 8 a.m. Eastern time, 7 a.m. Central, and 5 a.m. is just too damn early. We don't work about the 5 a.m. people over on the West Coast because it's just too damn early. But what can I say? Please do something nice for somebody, and it will go a long way. Continue to be safe, continue to be sound, continue to be healthy, and most importantly, above anything else, continue to be loved. Long live the peace, long live the funk, and more power to you. Take care, and do something kind again, and just simply, I always tell you at the end, be kind. I'll talk to you soon.